This is the Discontinuity Thesis, a 7-part series on why AI breaks the wage-demand circuit that post-war capitalism depends on. Written by Ben Lerongs. Episode 7, Drag is not rescue. The question in this episode is why integration friction, regulation, culture, and physical bottlenecks delay the transition without reversing it. The previous 6 episodes established a structural argument: unit cost dominance has been crossed, interface collapse propagates the crossover, the multiplayer prisoner's dilemma ensures no actor can restrain the propagation, the Sorites collapse principle and categorical recursion close the regulatory route, the successor system closes the structural alternatives route, the wage-demand circuit cannot be saved. The most sophisticated response to this argument does not engage the mechanisms directly, it engages the timeline. It accepts that the structural pressure exists, it points at the many forms of friction that slow, channel, or localize the deployment. The conclusion this response wants to draw is that friction provides time, time provides space for adaptation, adaptation can preserve enough of the wage-demand circuit to avoid the discontinuity. This episode says no. Friction modulates timing, it does not restore the circuit. The relevant question is not whether friction exists because it does. The question is whether friction restores mass productive necessity. It does not. Let me take the friction inventory at its strongest. There are 4 buckets. The first bucket is enterprise friction, integration costs, liability, data privacy, audit infrastructure. The second bucket is institutional friction, professional gatekeeping, regulation, public sector delay. The third bucket is physical friction, chips, power, data centers, energy. The fourth bucket is social friction, culture, local labor markets, premium niches, new jobs, redistribution. I will take each bucket in turns. Enterprise friction first. Integration cost is real. Deploying AI inside a workflow is not a matter of buying API access. It requires data pipelines, security review, change management, training, prompt engineering, output validation, integration with existing systems, error handling, audit infrastructure, organizational restructuring. Firms often take months, sometimes years, to move from pilot to production at scale. Liability is real. The legal status of AI-generated output remains unsettled in many domains. Until those questions are settled, conservative firms maintain human review structures whose primary purpose is liability allocation rather than quality control. Data privacy obligations are real. GDPR, HIPAA, and similar regimes constrain data movement across jurisdictional or institutional boundaries. How does enterprise friction respond over time? Integration cost is a transient cost. Firms that pay it once amortize it across subsequent deployments. The first AI deployment is expensive, the 10th is routine, the 100th is automated. Integration is often an adoption tax that can be amortized, standardized, and packaged over time. It is not a stable mechanism for restoring mass productive necessity. Liability resolves over time. The legal questions unsettled now will be settled within years through case law, regulation, insurance products, indemnification clauses. Where AI judgment proves more reliable than human judgment, courts and insurers will treat AI use as the standard of care. The liability incentive will reverse. Not deploying AI will become the legal risk. Data privacy constraints push deployment architecture rather than preventing deployment. Federated learning, on-device inference, anonymization pipelines, data clean rooms allow AI deployment in regulated industries with adjusted infrastructure. The constraints are real but routable. Now institutional friction. Professional gatekeeping is real. Bar associations, medical boards, accounting bodies, and other professional regulators control credentialing and define professional conduct standards. They have institutional incentives to preserve human roles. Regulation and public sector delay are real. Government agencies move slowly. Procurement processes are slow. Public sector adoption lags private sector adoption by years. How does institutional friction respond over time? Professional gatekeeping operates on the same multiplayer prisoner's dilemma logic. Professional bodies are made up of practitioners who face competitive pressure. Bodies that try to preserve human roles by restricting AI use slow adoption inside their jurisdiction while losing market share to adjacent providers, foreign competitors, and unregulated alternatives. The drift toward accommodation is structural. Public sector delay is real but does not stop deployment. Private sector adoption proceeds while public sector adoption catches up. Now physical friction. Compute and energy bottlenecks are real. Frontier model training is constrained by chip availability, data center capacity, energy supply, grid interconnection. Inference at scale faces similar constraints. How does physical friction respond? Inference cost has fallen by orders of magnitude. Energy infrastructure is being built faster than at any point in the post-war period because the demand justifies it. Bottlenecks slow particular deployments, they do not stop the deployment trajectory. Now social friction. Cultural resistance is real. Workers, managers, customers, and citizens have preferences about human-mediated interaction. Some markets pay a premium for human service. Local labor markets are real. Geographic specialization, network effects, language barriers, regulatory variation, cultural difference produce labor markets that adjust on different timescales. Premium human niches are real. High-end legal practice, bespoke medical care, luxury hospitality, artisanal production, concierge services pay premiums for human delivery. New job formation is real. Every previous wave of automation produced new job categories. AI is producing new categories now. Political redistribution is real. Welfare states exist. Tax and transfer systems exist. There are political pathways through which the worst outcomes of unmanaged transition can be avoided. How does social friction respond? Cultural resistance is genuine but heterogeneous. Some markets prefer human service and pay for it. Most markets in the long run choose price. Local labor markets adjust at different speeds and with different sectoral mixtures. The Bay Area technology sector adjusts on one timescale, a regional manufacturing town adjusts on another. The aggregate adjustment is the sum of many local adjustments. The claim is not uniform collapse. It is that the cognitive wage premium that supported middle-class absorption weakens wherever interface-mediated cognitive work becomes substitutable. Premium human niches absorb a small fraction of the displaced workforce. High-end legal practice in the United States employs perhaps 100,000 lawyers. The legal profession overall employs over 1 million. Premium niches scale to thousands per category, not to the tens of millions that mass labor absorption requires. New job formation is real. Current AI-related job categories exist. They remain far smaller than the exposed cognitive labor force, and many are themselves exposed to automation. They do not substitute for the millions of cognitive workers being squeezed out of the entry-level pipeline. The verifier role itself is bounded by the same arithmetic. Even under conservative assumptions about human cognitive distribution, the number of people who can meaningfully oversee complex multi-step agentic systems at professional standard is a minority share of the workforce, large enough to matter, too small to preserve mass absorption at the scale the post-war circuit required. Political redistribution is the structural alternative the previous episode addressed. It can preserve consumption, it does not preserve the circuit. Now why the friction inventory does not aggregate to rescue. A critic might respond that even if no single form of friction provides rescue, the aggregate friction across all 4 buckets produces enough drag to preserve substantial labor markets. The argument fails for 3 structural reasons. First, the frictions do not aggregate symmetrically. Many decay, root around, or become standardized over time. Others persist locally. Liability may harden in specific domains. Energy constraints may bite in particular jurisdictions. Political resistance may intensify in specific sectors. The aggregate drag may remain significant in places. It does not become a stable mechanism for restoring mass-productive necessity because the frictions that persist do so for reasons that do not reverse the deployment trajectory. Second, the frictions do not affect the structural mechanism. The multiplayer prisoner's dilemma operates regardless of how slowly the deployment proceeds. As long as deployment is competitively dominant, every actor that delays is competitively eliminated by actors that do not. Friction redistributes the deployment across time and across actors. It does not produce a stable equilibrium in which deployment stops. Third, the frictions do not restore the wage demand circuit even if they slow propagation indefinitely. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that friction is permanent and that AI deployment proceeds at half the speed the thesis assumes. The result is that the wage demand circuit collapses over 40 years instead of 20. The trajectory is unchanged. The structural condition is unchanged. The successor system question still arrives just later. Slower destruction is not preservation. The friction inventory is therefore not a rescue, it is a timing modifier. The honest version of the argument is that the wage demand circuit is propagating through a damped exponential rather than a step function. The pressure is structural and unidirectional. The damping is real and varies by domain, geography, and political regime. The trajectory is the integral of the structural pressure against the local damping. Friction is the local damping function, it does not change the integral. What does this mean for policy? Friction is not the absence of structural pressure, it is the response of the existing system to the structural pressure. Workers, firms, professions, regulators, and states all generate friction because they are responding to the pressure. The friction is evidence of the pressure, not evidence against it. The policy implication is that friction management should not be confused with circuit preservation. A regulator who designs liability rules to slow AI deployment in healthcare is doing useful work. The regulator is not preserving the wage demand circuit. The regulator is buying time during which other policy choices can be made about what comes next. That time is valuable, it is not infinite, the choices have to be made. Critics who treat friction as rescue are using the time the friction provides to defer the policy choices the friction is meant to enable. This is the worst possible use of the time. The friction exists because the structural pressure exists. The structural pressure does not stop because friction is slowing it. The right policy response is to use the slow period to design the successor system, not to use it to deny that a successor is needed. This is the request the entire sequence has been building toward. Stop debating whether the wage demand circuit can be saved. Use the time the friction provides to design what comes after. The friction is a gift if used to design well. It is a trap if used to defer the design. Drag is not rescue. Friction modulates the timing of the discontinuity. It does not restore the wage demand circuit. The wage demand circuit is no longer self-reproducing under the new technological condition. It can continue institutionally for some period after its reproduction mechanism has failed. That continuation is not survival, it is managed transition. The corpse does not need to be cold for the wound to be fatal. The wound is structural. The friction is the body's response to it. Neither the wound nor the response restores the function the body had before. The function has to be reconstituted by something else, or it does not exist anymore. That is what the rest of this century is going to be about. That is the final episode of the Discontinuity Thesis. The full 7-essay sequence, transcripts, citations, and refutation standard are at unitcostdominance.com. The argument is not that every human job disappears. The argument is that the wage demand circuit is no longer self-reproducing. That is the discontinuity.